Every single day, forces you've never heard of are moving your money. The Fed, AI, geopolitics, currency wars. Most people only see the headlines, but they never understand the signal beneath the noise. That's what MacroSignal is for. Today, we're diving into a massive paradox that literally has Wall Street scratching its head. Fewer jobs, but somehow lower unemployment. Let's get right into it.
Look at this number, 3.5%. That's the surprisingly resilient year-over-year wage growth we saw for June. And honestly, for anyone tracking the macro landscape right now, this number was an absolute shockwave, mainly because it directly contradicted pretty much all the other headline data we're seeing.
And here's exactly why those headlines can be so misleading. On one hand, June only added 57,000 jobs. That completely missed the 110,000 forecast and hit a brutal 4-month low. But then, simultaneously, the unemployment rate actually fell to 4.2%, right? So you're probably asking, how on earth does unemployment drop when job creation is that weak? Well, the answer is actually that workers just straight up left the labor force, meaning they're no longer even counted as unemployed.
So how did the market react to this super conflicting macro signal? Well, this chaotic labor data basically sent gold absolutely surging past $4,050 an ounce. Traders immediately started hedging their bets, right? They were totally unsure if the Fed would view that weak job growth as a reason to maybe cut rates, or if that spicy 3.5% wage growth was a reason to hike them.
Complicating things even further, consumer prices actually dropped 0.4% from the previous month, which was driven heavily by falling oil prices. And by the way, that is the first monthly decline we've seen since all the way back in 2020. At the exact same time, Fed Chair Kevin Warsh was testifying before Congress, reiterating his commitment to price stability, but he notably held back from signaling any kind of aggressive policy stance.
So, let's recap for a second. Job creation is tanking, wages are up, gold is surging, and the Fed is just kind of playing it cool. The headline numbers make it look like an incredibly straightforward situation, right? Well, actually, not so fast. Here is the massive curiosity gap you really need to understand. Are we looking at a genuine economic cooling, or is the upcoming data hiding a massive temporary distortion?
Section 1. The World Cup Distortion. Okay, to really wrap your head around the scale of this, look at these numbers. The 2026 World Cup spans the US, Mexico, and Canada between June 11th and July 19th. We're talking about 5 to 6 million fans flooding in for 78 matches. But here's the kicker. 11 US metropolitan areas are hosting these games. Why does that matter to your money? Well, because those specific host cities account for roughly 1/3 of the entire US GDP and nearly 1/4 of total US employment. When a global event hits an economic footprint that large, the data gets completely warped.
And here is exactly what that warping looks like. According to Goldman Sachs estimates, June payrolls get artificially pumped up by about 40,000 temporary jobs. Remember that headline of 57,000 jobs added? Yeah, a huge chunk of that is literally just this artificial World Cup timeline. July then sees another 10,000 jobs added. But watch out for August because we're going to see a projected drag of 15,000 jobs as the tournament packs up and leaves.
If you look at where these phantom jobs are actually hiding, it makes total sense. This massive tourism boom is heavily concentrated. The hiring spree is being absorbed almost entirely by leisure and hospitality, retail trade, and transportation. Think bartenders, hotel staff, Uber drivers. This is event-related activity, guys. It is absolutely not a reflection of any long-term economic expansion.
Now, this temporary hiring spree translates directly into a short-term sugar rush for consumer spending and US GDP. All that spending from domestic and international visitors, it's expected to give June retail sales a 0.3 percentage point lift and another 0.1 lift in July. And looking at the broader economy, analysts estimate the World Cup adds a 0.1 percentage point lift to annualized US GDP in the second quarter, and 0.05 in the third, right before it turns into a modest drag. And yeah, you guessed it, this sugar rush also completely clouds the true inflation picture. Remember that super rare 0.4% drop in consumer prices we just talked about? Well, the World Cup is actually fighting against that drop in a very localized way. Higher hotel, restaurant, and transport prices in these host cities are expected to slightly bump up core CPI by 0.03 percentage points and core PCE inflation by 0.04 in June. Sure, it sounds small, but it's exactly the kind of noise that clouds the real signal for traders.
Section 2. Gold's role amidst the noise.
We really need to quickly define gold's fundamental drivers to understand why it remains such a critical barometer for us right now. Gold isn't just some shiny metal sitting in a vault, it actually plays a really unique dual role. On one side, it's heavily driven by financial markets and investment demand as a safe haven asset during times of economic uncertainty and inflation. But on the flip side, it's also a consumer good and relies heavily on industrial use.
In fact, global demand for gold is incredibly diverse and international. Believe it or not, demand is actually led by jewelry consumption worldwide. The major consumers here include India, China, the US, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the United Arab Emirates. It's this massive, diverse, international consumption that provides a structural floor, supporting that hefty $40–50 price tag, completely regardless of a one-month blip in US jobs data.
But here's the most crucial piece of the gold puzzle right now. Even with all the World Cup noise and June's falling inflation headlines, there are very real geopolitical risks keeping gold elevated. Renewed tensions between the US and Iran have lifted oil prices. This keeps those underlying structural inflation concerns firmly on the radar for institutional investors, which pushes them right back towards safe haven assets.
Section 3. Signal beneath the noise.
Okay, this quote from the Goldman Sachs report should literally be your guiding principle for the next few months. Quote, "Understanding their magnitude will help investors distinguish World Cup-related distortions from underlying economic trends." Smart money isn't just looking at the top-line numbers right now. They are already actively calculating the exact difference between the tournament's temporary bumps in retail and jobs and the actual underlying health of the real economy.
So the crucial takeaway here is this exact sequential ripple effect. You want to keep this timeline in your head. First, we have the June and July economic boost, basically an artificial high in jobs and spending. Then we hit the August data drag, the hangover, when those 15,000 temporary jobs just vanish. And all of this conflicting, distorted data is going to dump right onto the desks of the Federal Reserve just in time for their big September rate decision.
Which brings us to the ultimate stakes, 50%. Amidst all of this noise, the contradictory jobs data, the World Cup distortions, the rising geopolitical tensions, and gold soaring to $4,050, markets are currently pricing in exactly a 50% chance of a Fed rate hike in September. It is quite literally a coin toss right now.